All right, so right now we're going to build just a really simple website using React and Ruby on Rails. And I thought it'd be fun to do something kind of meta. So basically the idea is to build a mini course website that will then host the videos that show you how to build the website we're going to be making. So if you look here, you can see we have this sort of top Jumbotron section that kind of explains to you what this website is. And if we scroll down, you can see we have a breakdown of the video modules. And then what's kind of cool that we're going to do is for each of the modules, you can actually click in to expand it and then watch that video. So you can see I can scroll down to the next one and I can expand this one. And that'll actually collapse all the other modules and make this the active item. So pretty simple concept. So we're going to be using React. We're going to be using Ruby on Rails. We're going to use Webpacker. We're going to use Bootstrap. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we need to create a new Rails app from scratch. But what we're going to do is we're going to configure our app to use React right out of the gate using Webpacker. So what we can do is in my terminal, I'm going to do Rails new to create a new Rails app. And I'm going to call this React for Rails developers. And then what we can do to set this up with Webpacker to use React is we can just add -- webpack equals React. And then I'm also actually going to set the database to Postgres. And that's basically all that we need to do to configure this to build our initial Rails app with React set up. So with that, we can go ahead and hit enter, and that'll start to build our app. So you can see it's building our app now, and it's installing Webpacker, and then we'll see that it's going to configure Webpacker to use React. Cool. So you can see Webpacker successfully installed, and we can see that it ran Webpacker install React. Awesome. So now that's finished building. And if you look, we have this message that says Webpacker now supports React. So now that we have our new app set up, let's go ahead and cd into that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open that up in my code editor. And if you're familiar with Rails, then most of this will probably look familiar to you. But if we jump over into our app folder here, you can see that we actually have now this JavaScript folder. And inside of that, we have this packs folder. So by default, we're going to have these two files inside of our packs folder. So we have the application.js file. And this basically just has comments on how to use this in your Rails app. So it tells you about, for example, the JavaScript pack tag. And then it just console logs out hello world from Webpacker. And if we jump over into the hello react.jsx file, and in here you can see they give us just like a really simple hello world example. So you can see we're importing React here, and there's this hello const, and it takes in props.name. And then down here they're passing in React for that name value. So it's just a really simple hello world example to get you started. So we've set up our app to use Webpacker and React, but by default, nothing's actually going to happen yet if we try to fire up our server. So we can actually test this out. If we go over here and do Rails S, then what we can do is navigate over to localhost 3000, and we'll see just the default yay, you're on Rails message that you get when you start a new Rails app up. So there's two reasons for this. One is we actually haven't set up anything for our root path yet. And the second thing is we actually need to inject our React from our JavaScript folder into our Rails views. So let's go ahead and do that. So over in my code, in config, we want to set up our root path and our routes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new controller for my app. So I'm going to create a pages controller with an index method. And then we can just make pages index the root path of this app. So I'm going to do Rails G controller to generate a new controller. And we'll just call this pages, and we'll give that an index method. So now what we can do is we can actually set up our root path for our app. So I'm just going to clear that out. And then what we can do is root pages index. And if we look over here, we can see that should have generated a new pages controller in our controllers that has an index method. And then in our views, we should have a pages folder now with index. So what we can do then is we can take the JavaScript pack tag from our JavaScript packs folder. You can see an example of it up here. And what we can do is we can paste that into either our application HTML ERB file, which we can find in our layouts folder here, if we want it to render across basically our entire website, or if we only want it for this one page, then we can go ahead and put it into this new index HTML ERB file. So for me in this case, I'm just going to put it into my root path here, so it's only on this page. But if you want to render your React across your entire site, then you can just throw it into the application HTML ERB file as well. So over in here, what I'm going to do is paste in our JavaScript pack tag for the hello React file. I'm going to save that. And now if we go back and we fire up our server, and then we go and navigate again to localhost 3000. Then once that loads, what we should see now is that should actually render our React into our view. So let's reload that. Okay, so that works. We can see that we're now loading our React into our view files. So with that, we are ready to start building out our React app. So I want to jump back into my code editor here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is inside of my JavaScript folder, I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this components. And inside of this folder, I'm going to just add basically everything that I want for what is going to be kind of our homepage for this website. So actually, let's go ahead and inside of components, I'm going to create another folder and I'm just going to call this home. And then inside of that, I'm going to create a file and I'm just going to call this home.js. Okay, so let's lay out just like a loose kind of battle plan here. So we have this home.js file. So inside of this, so we're going to have like a Jumbotron for the kind of top section of the homepage. And then underneath that, I'm going to have a sort of table of contents. So we can basically think of the table of contents as a list. And then inside of that, we're going to have a bunch of items. So we'll have a list of items. So each item is going to be a different module of what will be this sort of mini course that the website is going to be created for. And then basically at any given time, there can be one active item. So that'll be the expanded video that a user clicks on to watch. So we'll have a list of items inside of our table of contents, which is going to be our list. And any of those items can be selected and become the active item. So in the inactive items, we want to have a sort of like preview thumbnail component within that. And then for the active item, we want like the expanded like video for when that expands and actually shows you the video that you can watch. So this is just the loose breakdown of what I think we want to have for this website. So we'll have a Jumbotron up top, then we'll have this sort of table of contents that'll have this list of our different video modules. So for each of these components, I'm going to go ahead and just create a file in the structure that I think that we're going to have it. So I think all this is going to exist inside of this home folder that I've created here. And so we want to have a jumbotron.js file. And then we also are going to create a like table of contents folder. And I'm just going to call that table. And then inside of that, we'll have a table.js file. And then we will also have an item for all of our items. And then we're also going to create, we want to have like an active item for the selected item. And then for the inactive items, we want to have a preview, or I think I'm going to call this like thumbnail for the like thumbnail video. And then for the active item that's selected, we want to have like an actual expanded like video component. So we have our home component, and what we're going to do is pull in our Jumbotron for this. We're going to bring in our table, and then our table is going to have a bunch of items and possibly at any given time one active item. For our items, we'll have this thumbnail component, and for our active items, we'll have this video component. All right, so before we start writing React code, I want to do just a few quick little housekeeping things. So the first thing I want to do is I want to really quickly just bring in Bootstrap to help us out with some of the styling. So what I'm going to do for that is in my terminal, I'm going to kill the server here. And what I'm going to do is yarn add Bootstrap to install Bootstrap into our app. And then what we can do is we can come over here, and I'm going to rename this hello react.jsx file, and I'm going to make this into index.js. And if you're following along and you do this, just make sure that you also update the JavaScript pack tag to match what you change that to. So in my case, I'm going to make this into index. And then what we can go ahead and do though inside of this new index file is we can actually import Bootstrap. I think it's dist css and then bootstrap.css. And what that'll do is basically just give us access to Bootstrap so that we can use that to style our components as we're building this out. And with that, I think we're ready to start building out this website. So first things first, I'm going to jump back over into our home component. I'm going to get rid of this little roadmap that we've laid out here. And let's actually go ahead now and import React into our file here. And if you're using VS Code, there's this nice little shortcut you can get that just imports React and component from React for you. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then we can go ahead and do class home extends component. So we'll create our home component here. And inside of this, I'm going to do render. And then inside of that, I'll do return. And then inside of here, we can start to add some JSX. But before that, let's go ahead and add a constructor to this class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set our initial state here. So what I actually want to do is I want to create like a modules array inside of our state that holds all of the objects that are going to represent the different sort of course items for what we're going to build. And eventually what we'll do is we'll actually create a table in our database that can hold this data, and then we'll make a GET request when this component mounts to get that data and render it into our React. But for now, we can kind of mock that by just adding an array of objects into our state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this.state. And what I want to do inside of that is I want to create a modules. And I'm going to set that to be an array. And then what we can do is basically just set up all the default data that we want to add here to represent those different course items. So for each object in my module, we want to have an ID that'll later map to a database ID. And then we also want to have like a title for the video, and then we want to have a description for the video. And then we're also going to give it like a status, or we can just call this maybe active for now. And this will basically just be a Boolean. It'll be true or false on whether or not the video is currently active. And this will dictate whether it's that sort of collapsed preview view or if it's that expanded video view for the user to watch the video in. By default, we'll make all of them false. So that's the basic layout for the modules that I want to create. So let's go ahead and create like 4 of those. And then I'm just going to update them accordingly. So each one will have a different ID. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4 for that. And then I'm just going to give each one of these a title and a description. So for the first one, I'm going to do 1, setting up a new Ruby on Rails app with React. For the second one, we'll do 2. We'll do adding React to an existing Rails app. For 3, we'll do building a Hello World app. And then for 4, we'll do adding React router DOM to your app. So that'll be all the titles. And then for descriptions, for now, I'm just going to do like lorem ipsum, and we can just fill that in later. So we'll have 4 modules inside of our modules array here. Each one's going to have an ID, a title, a description, and an active status that's true or false. You know what? I think that modules is actually probably not a very good name for this. So let's actually call it something more descriptive. So we can call it like course modules or video modules. I think I'm just going to call this course modules. So we've set our state. We have an array of objects in our state. I think that that's all that we need for that for now. So let's just jump down and let's put something as a placeholder into our render method here. So I'm just going to do a new div, and I'm just going to do this is our home component inside of that. So what we can do now is we can export default home. And then what we can do now is over in my index.js file, we can actually, I'm going to get rid of this. What we can do is we can import home from, we're going to do /components/home/home. And then we can get rid of this and we can change that to our home component. We can get rid of this boilerplate code. And we actually, let's see. Okay, so we need to, in our constructor, we need to add super. And I think that should be everything that we need to do for our home component for now. So if we go over here now and if we fire our server back up, we should see this is our home component rendered out into the page now because we brought our home component into our index file, and now we're rendering that inside of React DOM.render. So let's go over here and let's reload this. Cool, so it looks like that's working, and now we can see this is our home component getting rendered out into the page. So let's start building out our Jumbotron. So what we can do is we can import React and component from React, and then we can go down here and we can do class Jumbotron extends component. Or you know what, we can probably just make this into a dumb component and just do const Jumbotron equals, and then inside of this we can just return some JSX, and then we can export default Jumbotron. So in this, let's go ahead and just build out the top section of the website. So I'm going to create like a new section. We can give this a class. So we'll use class name, and we'll just set this equal to like home section --1, just so we can style that in a minute. And then inside of this, I can actually start now to pull in our Bootstrap classes, and we can use that to style this component. So I can create a new div, and then inside of this, we can give that a class name of container. And then inside of that, I can create another div. We can give that a class name of row. And then what I want to do is I want to create like a 2-column layout. So inside of our row, I'm going to do 2 different divs that each have like col sm 12 md. I'm going to make this one 5, and then I'll create another one, and I'll make that 7, so that those both add up to 12. So what we're going to do is create like a 2-column layout where we have kind of like our headline and subhead on the left, and then we'll have like a video up top on the right. So in our left section, we can go ahead and create another div, and we can use some of Bootstrap's padding and margin classes. So we can do like pt4, mt4, so it's like padding top 4, margin top 4. And then inside of this, we can add the h1 for our website. So I can say React for Rails developers. And then we can add like a subhead, so we can do a paragraph, and we can say like supercharge your Ruby on Rails apps with react.js. So that'll be the header and subheader on the left side for our Jumbotron. And then on the right, we want to do, we can do like another wrapping div. We can give this class name. Again, we can do like pt4, mt4, so adding like padding and margin on top. We can also do like text center to center this, and then inside of this, I just want to put like a placeholder video. Okay, so I just copied an embed code from YouTube, so I'm just going to paste that in here. So we have an iframe now for YouTube video, and I think that should work for the most part. I think we have to change a couple of things probably in here. So we need to camel case this, I think, to make that work. And otherwise, I think that should work. We can test that out in a second. So we have our Jumbotron now. We have some Bootstrap classes pulled in. So we have a container, we have a row, we have these 2 columns. So we have this content on the left, we have the content on the right. So let's go ahead. We've exported our Jumbotron. So let's bring that into our home now. So if we come up to the top of our home component, we can import Jumbotron from /Jumbotron. And let's actually go ahead and inside of our div here, we can get rid of this, and let's pull in our Jumbotron component. So let's go ahead and check out if that works. So I'm going to refresh this, and it looks like that works. So it doesn't look great yet, but we have our 2-column layout, we have our content on the left, we have our video on the right. It looks like a few of the properties from that iframe are having some issues, so we can actually we can probably fix that really quick. So we jump back into our Jumbotron. It looks like it wants frame border to be camel case as well, so let's do that. We'll refresh this. Cool, so that clears up that error. We can close this out. We can see we have the basics for our 2-column layout here. And one thing that we can do is we can, if I jump over in my terminal here, we can actually open this up in another tab. And we can run /bin/webpack-dev-server. And what this will do is this will basically set up real-time reloading when we make changes to our website, so that we don't have to manually keep reloading the page. So let's just, to be safe, I'm going to restart my Rails server just to make sure everything is working. But now when we go and make changes in our React code, we should see this update in real time. So we can go ahead and test this out. So if we jump back into VS Code, if we pull this in so we can see the page, let's go ahead and let's just get rid of our title for a second. So I'm going to save that. You can see in the background there, it's actually updating the page now in real time to reflect our changes. So I can jump back in here and we can undo that. You can see it's bringing back in that content. So now we have the pages reloading in real time, and we don't have to manually keep reloading it. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to style this up and actually make it look a little bit better. So I'm going to import a library called styled components that we can use to actually add some styling to this. So over here, I'm going to kill these servers, and I'm going to yarn add styled components. Okay, so now we can start our servers back up. And now what I want to do is I want to bring styled components into my Jumbotron. So in here we can import styled from styled components. And now using styled components, we can actually start to style out our different elements within our JSX here. And the way that styled components works is pretty straightforward. So what we can do, for example, is I can create a const, and I can call this section. And I want this to represent basically this top section here that's wrapping all of our content inside of our Jumbotron. And what I can do is I can say that this is equal to styled, and then I can set it to the element. So I can do styled.section, and then we can use backticks. And then inside of that, we can actually set all of our CSS styling for the section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a background color. And I've got this nice red color I want to use, so it's D74234. And then I want to set like a min height for this. So we'll do like a min height of like 550 pixels. And then I want to give this some padding. So let's do like padding 250 pixels for the top and bottom, and 0 for right and left. And then I want to set the color for this to be white. So what we can do now is we can take this const and we can actually just replace the section there inside of our Jumbotron. And if you look, you can actually see in the background now that that has set the background color to that red that I just set. It's changed the text to white. So now it's taking all the styling that I just added to that. So that's pretty cool. So actually, it looks like that's a little bit too much padding. Let's go back in here. Let's just drop that down to like 100 pixels, refresh that. That looks more like the Jumbotron that I'm trying to make. So let's go ahead and let's style this up a little bit more. So I'm going to, we want to style this h1. So let's do const. And I'll just create a const called h1, and we'll do styled.h1. And I want that to be color white. I'm going to give that a font weight. It's a little bit thicker, so we'll do like 700 for that. I'm going to give it a font size of like 40 pixels. We'll do a line height of maybe like 52 pixels. And then we need to actually apply this to our h1. So I can go over here and I can just replace that with the new const we've created. If we look back here, we can see now that's beefed up our h1 and added those changes. So similarly, I want to come over and I want to add some style for our subheader. So we can just call this like just subhead, I guess, and we'll make that equal to style.p because it's a paragraph. Inside of that, I'm going to do, we'll give that a font size of like 18 pixels. We'll give that a font weight of like 500. And that's probably good for now. So I'll just set this to replace that. And actually, I don't want to call that h1. Let's actually change that to be like header. We'll replace that here. We'll take a look, and it looks like that all looks good so far. Oh man, you know what we totally need is we need a CTA button right here. So let's go ahead and add that. So inside of this, in our Jumbotron, in our left column, we want to, under our header and subheader, let's go ahead and add another div, and we'll make this into like a wrapper for our call to action button. So we can say like CTA wrapper. And then inside of this, I'm just going to add a new anchor tag. We'll do like class name, we'll say like button, and then we'll do, we'll call this like our fancy button and style that in a second. And then inside of this, let's just do like get started as the call to action. So now using styled components, let's go ahead and let's create a new const, and we'll call this like our button. We can call it do styled. We'll do a because it's an anchor tag, and then we'll do backticks. And then inside of this, we can do the styling for our button. So I'm going to add some styling for this. So I'm going to do display inline block. We can do text decoration none. And then I want to do like a heavier font weight for this. So do font weight. We can just make this bold. For the cursor, we want it to be that little clicky hand when you hover it. So we'll do cursor pointer. I want this just to be a nice thick square. So we'll do border radius 0 on that. And then I also want to give this a background. I'm going to make that white. And then I want to give this a box shadow. I'm going to add this box shadow effect that I came across the other day that I just really dig and I've been playing around with lately. So I'm just going to paste that in here. So we have this funky box shadow. So let's go ahead and let's add this to our CTA button. So come down to our anchor tag and we'll just replace that with button. And now let's go ahead and take a look at that. So let's fix the text on that and make that a darker color. Cool. Okay, so we have our button there. Actually, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. Let's go ahead and add some padding to that. We'll do like 10 pixels, 20 pixels. Make the font size like 18 pixels for that. And we'll give it a width actually of like 100%. Let's take a look at that. Ooh, too big, too big. Let's not do that. And you know what? That's actually probably fine for now. We can just tweak that later. But with that, we now have our Jumbotron component, and it's actually starting to look pretty good. So now we can move on to do our table component. So now for our table component, we're basically going to create a sort of wrapper or container that we can use to bring in all of our items and our active item and display them inside of that. So let's go ahead and let's import React and component from React. And we'll do class table extends component. And then inside that we'll do render, and we'll do return. And then inside of that we can add our JSX. And for this we want to add a constructor. And we'll pass props into this because we're going to pass props down to our table. And then inside of that we'll call super with props. And now we can build out the basic wrapper with our JSX for our table. So initially this is just going to be really simple. So we can just add like a div here, and we can give this class. Let's just add like some padding to this. So we'll do like padding top 5. We'll do padding bottom 5. And then inside of this, we want to add a container class from Bootstrap. And then inside of that, let's add another div, and we'll just give this, we'll center this. We'll do text center, which is another class we have from Bootstrap. And then let's just add like a header for our table of contents. We'll do like an h2 for this. And again, I love throwing in these little like buffers of the padding top, padding bottom. So we'll do pt4, pp4. And we'll just give this a title for this section. So we'll do like React for Rails developers, like videos or like table of contents or something. So that's all that we really need for the table for now. And then once we create our items, we can actually bring those in and we'll display those through our table. But for now, what we can do is we can just export this. We'll do export default table, and then back over in our home now. We're importing our Jumbotron. Now we can also import table from, and this is actually inside of a table folder that we created, if you remember. So we have to do /table to get into the folder, and then table again to get the actual component. But then what we can do is we can just bring that in after our Jumbotron. So let's see what that looks like. Cool, so you can see up here we have our Jumbotron component, and then down here we have the start of what will be the sort of table of contents for our video course modules. Okay, so now that we have the basic layout for our table, let's go ahead and create the items that we'll then insert into our table. So let's jump back into the code here. And over here we have our item.js. So inside of this we can again import React component from React, and then we can start to build out our items. So we can do class item. Actually, you know what? I think this can also just be like a dumb component. So we can do const item. We're going to pass down props to this. We'll just make this into an arrow function. So inside of this, we can then do return. And inside of our return, we'll have our JSX. And then let's go ahead and just add our Bootstrap classes to this. So we can do class name. I'm going to make this a row. And then inside of that, what I'm going to do is, and this might get a little weird, but I'm going to do another div. And basically, I'm going to make this, I'm going to use columns, but I'm going to do col_md10, and then we can use an offset to sort of fill in on the left and right of this. So I can do offset MD1, so that'll still add up to 12 because that'll add an offset of 1 on each side of this. So we're still working within Bootstrap's 12 column layout, but this will basically sort of squeeze in our content to the center. So inside of that, let's do another div. And I'm just gonna do text center here to center this, and then we'll make another div inside of that, and we can pull in a card class from Bootstrap. So we'll do card, and we'll add just like some random padding to that again, just because I love to do that. And then I'm going to do something kind of weird to get the ideal layout that I want. There's probably a better way to do this. If anyone is a Bootstrap expert and knows a better way to format this, feel free to drop a comment below and let me know. But I'm actually going to add another row inside of the row. And then inside of that, I'm again going to use Bootstrap columns to sort of format this the way that I want. But basically what I want to do is I want to create a left-right column layout where on the left we have our thumbnail of the video, and then on the right we have the content, so like the title and description of that video basically. And you know what, let's create our thumbnail component, just because I want to pull that in here so that we can bring that into our items. And then this is just going to be a dumb component, so we can do const thumbnail. We'll make this into an arrow function, and this is just going to return a div, and inside of that div, let's go back over to the Jumbotron, and I'm just going to copy the iframe from that over into my thumbnail. So inside of this, we'll use this as just like a temporary placeholder. We'll make the thumbnail just a miniature version of the actual video itself. And I'm just going to set the width and height of this to be like 100%. And that's all that we're going to do for the thumbnail for now, I think. So let's do export default thumbnail. And so now what we can do is in our item, we can actually import thumbnail from thumbnail. And now we can put that into our left column in here. So we can do thumbnail here. So now we'll have this left-right layout where we have the thumbnail of the video on the left, and we have the headline and description of the video on the right. So for that on the right here now, let's add another div. And again, I'm just gonna kind of sprinkle padding all over the place. So we'll do class name equals pt4, pb4, so that's padding top 4, padding bottom 4. And then inside of this, let's add, for our header on this, we'll do like an h4. And then under this, we'll add a paragraph tag. And now what we'll do is, this is where we're going to end up passing down the title and description from our state for those modules that we created back in our home component. So at this point, this will be props. So what we'll end up doing is props.title and props.description. And then additionally, we want to add like a CTA button in here. That's going to be the thing that you click to make this into the active item. So we'll give this a class name of just like our CTA wrapper. And then inside of that, we're going to have an anchor tag. And we'll add basically a method to that shortly that's going to let this turn each item into the active item. So for now, we can just do like class name equals CTA button. And we'll just do like watch this video. Okay, so that should be good for now. So let's go ahead and export that. So we export default item. And now what we can do is back in our table, this is where we can actually start to have some fun. So let's actually, in our home component, we have this.state.course modules here. So we're going to actually pass that down now to our table. So we're going to say course modules equals this.state.course modules. So then now what we can do is back in our table, we can import item from /item. And now we can, inside of our render method, create a new variable. So we can call this const items. Basically what we want to do is we want to take our course modules. So now we can access that as this.props.course modules inside of our table here. Basically for each item in our array, we want to map over that. For each item as data, we're going to create an arrow function. We basically want to take each item and we want to create a new instance of our item component for the data from each object in that array. So for each object in the array, we want to basically create a new instance of our item component. So what we can do inside of this is we can just return our item component, and then inside of this we can pass in a key, We could do a couple things here. So we could either also pass in the index of the item in our array and make that the key, or we can just pass in the ID on each item in our course modules. And then additionally, I want to pass down the title. So title equals data.title. And then we want to also pass down a description. So we're going to do description equals data.description. So now what that's going to do is that's going to pass down the title and description into our item. And that'll get rendered out for our props.title and props.description that we added here. So now that we have this items variable, what we can do is we can, inside of our JSX here, after the header for our table of contents, we can actually just render out our items here. So we can add that. It looks like that threw an error. So let's just take a look here. If we inspect this, we can see it looks like the error is actually in our thumbnail component. So if we go over here, if we look at thumbnail, it looks like the issue is because we have not actually imported React for our thumbnail component. So let's save that, come back over here, and now it looks like we can actually see that it's rendering out. We can see it looks like everything's working, and now it's rendering out our items into our table of contents onto the page. All right, so it looks like everything's working now, but actually I want to add a little more padding around this. So let's actually go back in here, and for our thumbnail, let's do class name. We'll sprinkle on some of those magical Bootstrap classes. So we'll do padding top 4, we'll do padding bottom 4, and then back over in our item itself, on the row before we actually hit the card that's adding the border around this, let's add again padding top 4 and padding bottom 4 around that. And let's see what that looks like. Oh man, way better. And then I don't really like that that's centered. So let's go back into our item, and for this. Can we just get rid of this class actually? Let's see. Yep. Okay, that looks way better. And then we need to style this button. So let's do that as well. So that is our CTA button here with watch this video. So it's a good opportunity to import styled from styled components. And then let's style up our button. So we'll do const button equals styled.a because it's an anchor tag. And then inside of this, we can add all of our CSS. And you know what? Let's just copy over the style that we added into our Jumbotron button. So I'll just copy this. We can come back over into our item, and we'll just paste that in here. And then we can just replace our anchor tag down here with button. And let's see what that looks like. Cool. Pretty funky, but not a bad start. So now we have our Jumbotron up top, and now we have this sort of table of contents, and we're rendering in each of our items with the preview thumbnail and a description and title on the right here. Okay, so now we've created our home component, we've created our table, we've created our items for our table, we've created our thumbnail sort of preview component that goes inside of our items. So now the last thing that we need to do is we need to create our active item, and then we need to create the expanded video component that goes inside of the active item. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to jump back in the editor, and we have this active item file over here. So honestly, the active item is going to be basically the same thing as the item. We're just going to kind of switch around the Bootstrap classes for what happens when the item is active. So I'm going to change this to be active item. We'll change this down here to match. So we'll have active item now. And honestly, all that I'm going to change is I'm going to get rid of the 2-column layout here. So instead of having column D4 on the left and column D8 on the right, I'm just going to go ahead and do like column D10. We'll do another offset MD1. So we'll do an offset on each side of that. And then basically we can just get rid of this other column. And we can bring this up. And then let's move this down. So we'll wrap everything inside of our column D10. And honestly, I think that's all that we need to do for the active item. So it's going to be really similar to the item, but we're dropping that 2-column layout, and it's just going to be one big item. And then we're going to get rid of thumbnail here and actually add in video instead. So let's create our video component then. So inside of video, we can import React from React, and then we'll do const video. We'll make this into an arrow function. We'll make that return. This is going to be really similar to our In fact, actually, this can probably be identical to our thumbnail component. So honestly, we could actually probably just have one component for this for now if we wanted, but eventually I'm going to want to be able to do different things with each of these. So it's good that we have these broken out as two separate components. So let's export default video. Now inside of our active item, instead of thumbnail, we'll import video. And then down here, we will pass in video. So now we want to import our active item into our table. So we'll import item and we'll import active item /active item. So now what we want to do with our active item is if we look back inside of our items variable that we created down here. So right now we're just iterating over our array of objects and we're passing each one into a new instance of our item component. So we want to tweak this slightly. So what I want to do is inside of this, I'm just going to make this multi-line, wrap this with parentheses. So what I want to do, so we have data representing each object in our array. And what I want to do is, if you remember, on each object we have that active state that's going to be true or false. So what we can do is we can actually say if data.active is true, then we want to, instead of rendering the item, we actually want to render the active item. We can pass in all of the same values for that. So basically, if the item is active, then we want to use the active item component. Otherwise, use the item component. So now if we look, that shouldn't change anything yet. So we can see everything's still rendering fine, nothing exploded, and everything looks like it's just a standard item. But what we should be able to do now is if we go into our home, if we go into our state here, if we, for example, in the second video, switch the active state to true and save that, if we look, we can see the check for item or active item is actually working. So that's pretty cool. Let's fix that really quick. Some video, instead of height 100%, I'm going to do height, we'll make that 400, and we'll keep width at 100%. So let's go back here. It looks like that's all working. So if we check now, we have our items and we have our active item. We can see that instead of using the collapsed item component, we have our expanded active item. All right, so now comes the fun part. So what we need to do is we need to create a method inside of our home component that we can pass down to our items so that when we click on the watch this video button, we can toggle the active status for an item between active and inactive, basically. So let's jump back into our code and let's go into our home component and let's create a new method. So inside of this, I'm going to create a method and I'm going to just call this handle video change, let's call it. I don't know if that's the most descriptive thing, but that should probably work for now. So then inside of our handle video change method, I'm going to pass in two arguments. So I want to pass in item, and that's going to be the item that we've selected to be modified. And then I want to pass in the event itself. So inside of here, I'm going to do event.prevent-default. So let's just throw a debugger in here. And then let's take this method and let's pass that down into our table. So we'll say handle video change equals this dot handle video change. Then we need to bind this. So now we'll have access to that from our props inside the table. So if we go into table now, for basically our active item and our item, we can pass that in as well. So we can do handle video change equals this dot props dot handle video change. And we can do the same thing for item. And actually, I want to do something here that's going to seem a little bit weird. But basically, what I want to do is before we do return here, I want to create another variable. And I'm just going to actually call this handle video change. And what I want to do is assign this to this dot props dot handle video change. But then I want to rebind this, but also pass in data. And what this will do if this works is this will basically let us see which item out of that array of items is the selected item that needs to be modified. So we can create that variable, and then we can actually just pass in that variable now when we pass this down to active item and the individual item. So now what we should be able to do inside of item is when somebody clicks on this button, we can do button onClick, and we can just do props dot handle video change, and then we can do the same thing for active item. So now if everything is working, when somebody clicks on one of these buttons, then what should happen is we should hit our method. We should hit our handle video change method here, and then we should hit our debugger. And then once we do that, we can take a look at what item and event are at that point. So let's open up the console here. And now let's see what happens when I click this button. Perfect. So we hit our debugger. So let's open this up. Let's jump to the console. Let's check item. We can see perfect. So that's passing through the actual selected item. So out of that array of the 4 different items that we have getting passed down as the course modules from our state, this is telling us which of those is the actual selected item when we do this onClick action. And if we check event, we can see that we have our event. So we see we are hitting that anchor tag. So that's all just business as usual. So that's perfect. So now we have everything that we need to modify this. So we can close that out. Nothing's going to happen yet because all that's happening in our method is we are preventing default and then we're hitting that debugger. So let's change that. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of the debugger and I'm going to create a new variable and I'm just going to set this equal to the course modules in our state. So we can do like course modules. We can use the spread operator and we can set that equal to this.state.course modules. And let's just go ahead and console log that out to make sure that that works. So console log course modules. We'll go back over here. We'll refresh the page and let's clear that out and let's see what happens if I click the button. Cool. So we can see that that's console logging out all of our course modules. So the next thing that I want to do now is I actually want to take all of our course modules and I want to initially just map over them. And for each item as data, we'll do an arrow function. And what I want to do is I want to set the active status to false for all of our course modules. And the reason that I want to do that is basically I want to make sure that at any given time there can only be one active open item. So this will just be a simple way for now for us to make sure that everything else is set to false before we then set the active item. So what we're going to do here is just do data.active and set that equal to false. So now we want to take the actual selected item, which we have as that pass-in argument that we saw a second ago. We want to actually update active on that. And we just want to make that the opposite of whatever its previous Boolean value was. And the reason that we want to do that instead of just hard coding this to true is we want to make it so that if a user clicks the button and expands the video, they can also then click the button on the same video to collapse it again without having to go open another separate video to do that. So all that I'm going to do for this is I'm going to say item.active equals, I'm going to use a bang and just say the opposite of whatever item.active currently is. And then now all that we have to do is we need to update that item within our course modules, and then we need to update that in our state. So what we can do is we can find that item inside of our course modules by basically passing in the item ID and subtracting 1. So right now we have IDs that just increment by 1 starting at 1. So basically if we subtract 1 from the item ID, we'll find the specific selected items index in our course modules array. So this will let us select the specific item and reassign it. So we can say course modules and we'll get that specific item within the array and say that that equals item. So if that's working, then if we console log out course modules now, we should be able to see what everything looks like before we then set this to our state. So let's take a look again. I'm going to clear that out. Let's see what happens when we click that button. So now it should be console logging course modules after everything's been modified. So if we look at this, if we look at the first item, we can see active is set to true now. And for everything else, it's set to false. So if we try clicking here, we can see, so that's number 2, but it's the third item in our array. We can see that has an active status of true now. And the first one's false now. So everything's working. The reason that we're not seeing the change here is because we haven't actually set our state to the new value yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So now all we have to do inside of our handle video change is instead of console logging this out, let's get rid of that and we'll do this.setState and we can just pass in course modules for that there. So that should be everything that we need to do. So if we go back and check out this page again, we can see that the second video is actually open by default because we gave that a status of true. So let's switch that to false. So now let's come back here. We can see everything is collapsed by default. But now if we click on the first video, we can see that switches from the collapsed item now to the active item. Now if we click on the second video, we can see now the second video becomes our active item, and the first video is actually collapsed. So it looks like everything for that is now working. All right, so now everything is working on the React side of things. What would be super cool is if we could set this up now so that all this data that's getting passed in for these course module items was actually getting fetched from our Rails backend. So let's see if we can set that up. So I'm going to jump back into our code here, and I'm going to pull up our terminal. And what we want to do now is we need to create some models in our Rails app. So the way that I'm thinking about this right now might be overkill for what we need, but it would be nice if we could set this up so that we have the ability to create multiple courses, and each course had multiple sections, and each section had multiple like modules or videos. I think modules is probably a terrible name for this, especially in Rails. So I think I'm going to call this episodes for that. So we'll have courses. Courses will have many sections, and each section will have many episodes. So let's go ahead and set this up. So I'm going to use a generator to create a new model, and I'm going to call that course. And this is going to have a title, which is going to be a string, and a description, which is going to be a string. So let's go ahead and run that. Cool. And then we can go ahead and I'm just going to do Rails DB migrate to migrate that and create that table. Cool. Okay, so that creates our course table. So now let's do, we'll do another generator. We'll create another model. I'm going to call this section, and this is going to also have a title and a description. But we also want to add a belongs to, so we'll do course belongs to create that relationship for the section and the course. So that's set up. Let's go ahead and just also run the migration for that. And then finally, we need to run a generator to create our episodes model. And this is going to have a title, a description. We also want it to have a URL. It's going to be like the URL for each unique video. And then we also want to create a relationship so that it belongs to the sections table. So we'll do section belongs to. Cool. And then let's run the migration for that as well. Okay, so let's go take a peek now at our schema. So we'll go to DB, we'll go to schema. We can see now that we have a new courses table with the title and description. We have our episodes table with title, description, URL, and it's added now the section ID with an index, and then same thing for section with its relationship to a course. So it looks like that's all good. And if we jump up into our models, we should see the belongs to relationship set up for us. So if we look at section, we can see that that belongs to course. And if we look at episodes, we can see that that belongs to section. And then in our courses model, we can actually set this up and say has many sections, and then we can say has many episodes through sections. Okay, so now we need to actually add some seed data. So let's say like course equals course.create, and we want to create a new course that has a title of Hello World and a description of create a React app with Ruby on Rails. So that'll create our course, and then what we want to do is we want to create a new section. So we'll do section.create, and this will also have title. We'll make like chapter 1. We don't really need to worry about a description for this, I guess. And then we need to add course. We'll set equal to course to create the relationship there. And now we want to create our episodes. So we'll do episode.create. And then we actually want to make this an array so we can add multiple episodes. And then we can let's jump back over into our React code here, and let's just copy over the episodes that we added to our state initially. Let's just paste that into our seed file here. And then let's get rid of this. And let's get rid of this. And then what we want to do is we want to add a URL, and we can actually just grab the URL here from our Jumbotron, and we can just paste that in as a placeholder for now. So for each episode, we have a title, we have a description, we have a URL, and then we need to set the relationships. We need to give it a section ID that will set equal to this section that we're creating up here. So we'll say section ID equals, or actually we can just do section and set that equal to section, and that should work. So let's add that for each episode. And now let's see if this works. So in here, I'm just going to run Rails db seed. Cool. Nothing exploded, which is usually a good sign. So let's do Rails C. We'll jump into our console and we'll just make sure that we have that data now. So we can do course.first. Looks like we have our course. We'll do section.first. Let's make sure that we have the relationships. We'll do course.first.sections. See that we have the sections tied to that. And now we want to check and see if we have our episodes. So we'll do episode dot limit for. Cool. So we have all of our episodes. I don't know why I did limit. I could have just done all. But let's make sure that we have the relationship from course to episodes. So we'll do course.first.episodes. Okay, that's not working. So let's see. If we go back over into our models, we see we have course, has many sections, has many episodes through sections. Section doesn't have the has many relationship, so we need to add that. So has many episodes. So let's go back here. Let's close that. Let's go back in our Rails console. And again, we'll do course.first.episodes. Cool. Okay, so now all of our relationships are working on that end. So now let's actually, let's create, okay, so in my controllers, I'm going to create a new route inside of my pages controller. I'm just going to call this episodes, I guess. We can change that later if we want. And inside of this, we're going to say episodes equals course. For now, we just want to always grab the first course, and then we just want to grab all of its episodes. And then we can do render JSON, and we can say data, and so that equal to episodes. Okay, so now inside of our config, we need to add a new route for this. So config routes.rb. So we'll add get episodes to pages episodes. Okay, so now what we want to do is we need to add axios to our project, so we can use that to make the get request from our React components out to our Rails backend. So we're going to add axios here. Now we can jump back over into our home component. We can actually import axios from axios here. What we can do inside of our home component now is we can do component did mount, and inside of this we can do axios.get. We'll make a get request to /episodes.json. And then we want to add a dot then. We'll do data with an arrow function, and we'll throw a debugger in here. And we'll do the same thing for our catch case. So we'll do dot catch, same thing. So let's see what happens now if we fire up our servers and we try this again. So I'm going to do Rails S here, and we're going to do .bin/webpack-dev-server here. And actually, back in our controller, let's just throw a buy bug in here so we can see what happens. So I'm going to go over here, and we should open this up. And if everything works out, we should hit our buy bug on the back end, and then we should end up hitting one of our debuggers on the front end. So I'm going to reload this. And if we check this now, we can see that we hit the buy bug in our episodes path. So let's see what the value for this is. Cool. So we have all of our episodes that we just created. So that should get rendered out as JSON. We should now see that. So we should hit a debugger now on our front end. So let's go ahead and continue through that. And we hit our debugger. We're in our .then, which is looking good. Now we have this data. So let's see. We've got data. And inside of that, we have data again. And then we have data again. And then we have data again. And inside of that, we have our array. So we probably should rename that somewhere along the way, but for now it's probably fine. So it's cool though. So now we're getting back our data from the server, from the Rails side of things. It's pulling those episodes out of our database. So what that means is that we can actually use those to fill our state and pass that down into the items here. So let's see if we can set this up. So I'm going to jump back in here, and I'm just going to get rid of that buy bug, and then back over in home.js. So what we want to do is, let's see, we're going to get rid of this. So by default, let's make course modules just an empty array. So the first thing that we could do is we can basically take this response data that we're going to get from the server, which is going to be data.data.data. We can map over that. We can make the placeholder for that data if we want. We can do an arrow function. And what we could do is we could, so let's start small. So let's say first things first. Let's say I do let result equal an empty array. Then what we can do is basically say for each item that we're getting back from the server, we can do res.push, and then we can kind of set this up the way that we need to. So we could say like id equals data.id. We can do title equals data.title, description data.description, and then we can set all of these to have active false as the default. And then what we can do is we could say this.setState, and we could make course modules equal res basically. And I think that would work. Let's take a look and see what happens if we do that. So yeah, that's working. So that's a starting point where we're basically now getting the data from the server, and we are setting it into our state in our React app, and now we're rendering out each item based off that data. So now let's see what happens if we add a new episode to this. So I'm going to kill the Rails server for a second. We can go into our console. Let's see what happens if we do a new episode. So we'll do episode title. I don't know why I'm doing it this way. We'll do episode.title equals 5, getting data from your Rails server. And we'll do episode.section ID equals 1. We'll check to make sure that's valid. It is, so we'll save that. Now let's see what happens if we fire our server back up and re-render that page. So come over here, we'll reload that. Cool. So now we can see that it's pulling the next record out of the database. And so now just like that, we have an additional episode in our sort of table of contents of different course modules.